This video is on natural selection, and we're going to look at how the process of natural selection works and what is the issue with pathogen evolution. So in this section, we're going to learn about Darwin's theory of evolution and how it occurs by natural selection. We'll also see how this has been added to by modern genetics and further research. Now, the idea of evolution by natural selection was put forward in 1859 by a man called Charles Darwin. He published a very famous book called On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, and it changed the world. At the age of 22, Darwin went on a 5-year voyage on a ship called the HMS Beagle. He visited many places, made meticulous notes on all the species he found, and collected hundreds of samples. He made some of his most important observations on the Galapagos Islands, which are a small group of islands just off the coast of South America. On the Galapagos Islands, Darwin made some key observations about the wildlife. Firstly, that offspring from parents show variation. They're not all identical when he looked at the animals and their offspring. The parents produced many offspring, but the population stays about the same. So the second thing he noticed was that a lot of the young must be dying. The third thing was that the ones that have variations best suited to their environments seem to be the ones that are surviving. And the fourth thing was that they can then pass their adaptations onto their offspring. And using these observations, Charles Darwin came up with a mechanism to explain how one species can evolve and eventually change into another, and he called that process natural selection. So there are 4 stages to his theory of natural selection. Firstly, each species reproduces and the offspring show variation. Secondly, there is a lot of competition between these offspring for food, space, mates, etc., which we call selection pressures. And the ones with the best adaptations for their environment survive and the others die. This is what he called survival of the fittest. And those survivors pass on their better variations to their offspring. And if this continues over thousands and thousands of generations, then the species will slowly change to become more and more suited to their environment. Here's a picture of Darwin's drawings of some finches from the various different Galapagos Islands. And through natural selection, they have all evolved slightly different beaks in order to eat the foods available on their specific island. Now, the most basic definition of the word evolution, therefore, is the gradual change of an organism over time. However, since Darwin's ideas came about, we have now discovered DNA and have a deep understanding of how genetics works. And this means that we can update this definition of evolution. So a more modern definition would be evolution is the change in genetic composition of a population due to beneficial alleles being passed on to the next generation, leading to different phenotypes. Now, the evolution of pathogens is a nice example to look at. Pathogens are living organisms that cause disease. One of the biggest groups of pathogens are bacteria, and various bacterial infections killed millions of people every year until the first antibiotics were discovered and manufactured. Alexander Fleming discovered the first true antibiotic, penicillin, in 1928, and it was mass-produced in the 1940s. However, by the 1960s, many bacteria had evolved a resistance to penicillin. Bacteria can reproduce every 20 minutes, so the process of natural selection happens rapidly. The bacteria had a mutation that allowed them to make an enzyme called penicillinase that breaks down penicillin, and this allowed them to survive and pass on their resistance to their offspring. The challenge was set by the bacteria, so scientists created a new antibiotic called methicillin. However, this didn't last long either, and now we have a big issue in hospitals with methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, or MRSA, which is an example of a superbug. Now, there are 2 ways that this problem is being tackled. Firstly, getting doctors to use antibiotics more effectively. This means only prescribing them when totally necessary and giving better advice to their patients as to how to use them. And secondly, it's important for the pharmaceutical industry to keep researching into new antibiotics, and this needs to be incentivized by the government. But for the time being, the fight between pathogens and medicine goes on.